The humans disrupted the calm, and an eerie silence fell over the Galactic Council's chamber. Representatives from 100 different species, some breathing through gills, others encased in exoskeletal armor, shifted their gaze to observe the towering figure of the chief adjudicator. Vexil, whose 6 compound eyes twitched, clicked his mandibles as he replayed the events in his mind, hoping he had misunderstood. He had not. A holographic recording confirmed the sequence of events. The envoy, a delicate AV-embodied Saran diplomat, had approached the human delegation on the war-ravaged moon of Erix 9, where the talks were supposed to begin. The diplomat had offered the ceremonial unity fruit, a gesture of goodwill honed over millennia. The humans accepted, studied it, nodded in thanks, and then presented their own offering, roasted meat. The Saran had paused, politely refusing with a few chirps, but the humans insisted. What began as a misunderstanding escalated when a human identified as Captain Elias Brandt slapped the Saran on the back, grinned, and bit into his own portion with an audible crunch. The Saran, whose species bore a striking resemblance to the meat in question, dropped dead from shock. The recording ended abruptly as the chamber erupted in chaos. Shouts, screeches, and hisses filled the air. A representative of the Crush, a towering reptilian with glossy black scales, slammed his claws onto the table. The humans mocked the sacred rights of diplomacy. This cannot be allowed. Ambassador ROV, the human representative, sighed and rubbed his nose. This is absurd. Vexil recoiled. Absurd? A diplomatic envoy has perished. ROV waved a hand dismissively. From fear, not violence. If your diplomat had a condition that made him faint at the sight of cooked meat, it should have been in his medical records. The Saran don't consume flesh. A shrill voice from a Zari delegate pierced the air. And yet the humans, barbarians that they are, offer it as a gift. ROV shrugged. We eat meat. We thought it would be polite. In many cultures, sharing food is a sign of trust. A clicking sound came from the back of the room. Trust. The voice belonged to a Varric warrior, his armor scarred from battle. The humans share food as a sign of trust, yet never question what they are given. ROV leaned forward. Are you suggesting we should have assumed the fruit was poisoned? The Varric tilted his head. I'm saying that if a creature unfamiliar to you handed you something, would you eat it without question? A murmur spread throughout the chamber as realization set in. You do not fear the Crush, whispered ROV with a smirk. Not particularly, came the response. Vexil's mandibles twitched. You misunderstand. It's not a compliment, it's a warning. Do you not understand the gravity of what we discuss here? You lack the fundamental instincts that govern all other sapient life. No rational species would so casually consume an unknown substance. Rakoff, the human delegate, drummed his fingers on the table. We've got medics, antitoxins, and stomach pumps. If things go wrong, we fix it. Most things that would kill you just make us sick for a few days. We adapt. The Crush let out a low growl. That is not adaptation. That is recklessness. ROV sighed. We call it resilience. The murmuring in the room grew louder. Some species looked at the humans with newfound respect, while others regarded them with deepening horror. Vexil exhaled slowly. This council was called to decide if humanity is a threat. I no longer believe that question needs answering. His voice grew solemn. You do not fear the unknown. You do not hesitate in the face of danger. And worst of all, he turned to face Rakoff directly, you clearly missed the memo. ROV blinked. Memo. Vexil gestured to the chamber. Every species here evolved to survive. Every species here learned that caution preserves life. Every species here follows the natural laws of preservation. His mandibles twitched. But you? You ignore them. You rush forward when others hesitate. You laugh at warnings that keep others alive. A sudden silence filled the chamber. ROV exhaled. So what now? Vexil's mandibles clicked again. Now we reconsider everything. The chamber was eerily quiet, the weight of Vexil's words settling like a thick fog over the gathered species. Humanity wasn't dangerous because of advanced weaponry or large fleets. It was because they lacked something every other species had, an instinct for self-preservation. Ambassador ROV rolled his shoulders, letting the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. Reconsider everything? What exactly are we reconsidering? Vexel's compound eyes glinted in the dim glow of the chamber's hollow displays. Whether humanity can coexist with us without destabilizing everything. That stirred another round of murmurs. Some voices were uncertain, others, like the crushed delegates, rumbled with something closer to anger. We let them into the council because we assumed they share the same basic survival instincts as the rest of us, ROV said, his voice low but carrying weight. That assumption has clearly been proven false. ROV chuckled, shaking his head. You're talking like we're wild animals. Perhaps you are, a Zari delegate retorted. His species had evolved in dense, predator-infested jungles, making survival second nature. You do not behave as a rational species should. ROV tilted his head. Define rational. The Zari furrowed his ridged brow. A rational species does not consume unknown substances without verifying their safety. A rational species does not smile in the face of danger. ROV raised a hand. I get it. We don't react the way you expect. He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Maybe you should be asking why. The chamber fell silent again. The Varrock warrior, who had been watching the discussion with curiosity, folded his arms. Explain. ROV exhaled. Look, I get why you think we're reckless. But you're assuming we don't understand risk. We do, we just approach it differently. He gestured vaguely. Take your example about eating unknown food. Sure, we don't always hesitate, but that's because we've built systems to handle the consequences. Our bodies can handle more than most. If it fails, we rely on medicine. We take the hit, adapt, and move forward. The Zari's eyes narrowed. And what of your reckless disregard for death? ROV blinked. What disregard? Vexel interjected, his voice heavy. It's not just about food or fear responses. Your entire species operates under an unnatural absence of caution. You engage in combat at the slightest provocation. You charge into battles, even when outnumbered. Your soldiers have been observed continuing to fight after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate any other species. And when faced with the possibility of death, you either shrug it off or laugh. The crushed delegate's claws drummed on the table. I have seen humans fight. I have seen them bleed, and yet they refuse to fall. That is not natural. Rakoff sighed. Look, we're not mindless berserkers. We don't have a death wish. He paused. But if you're asking why we don't hesitate, it's because hesitation gets you killed. The Varrock warrior let out a low hum, considering. You do not hesitate because you cannot afford to. Rakoff nodded. Exactly. He leaned back slightly. I don't know how it was for your species, but for us, we didn't evolve in stable conditions. We weren't the biggest, fastest, or strongest creatures on our planet. We were prey before we were predators. The only reason we survived is because we learned to push forward, no matter what. He gestured toward the assembled council. Most species reach a point where they no longer need to fight to survive. You build your cities, advance your technology, and eventually the struggle fades. His gaze sharpened. For us, it never faded. We just got better at surviving. The chamber was deathly quiet now. The crushed delegate bared his teeth. That is why you do not fear. ROV exhaled through his nose. It's not that we don't feel fear. We just don't let it stop us. A long silence stretched between them. The gathered representatives exchanged glances, some uncertain, others contemplative. Finally, Vexel spoke again. So, this is what you are then. A species that rushes headlong into danger, not because you fail to understand it, but because you refuse to let it dictate your actions. Rakoff met his gaze. Sounds about right. The Varrock warrior let out a deep, rumbling laugh. Now I see why your kind thrives in war. The crushed delegate grunted. It's not only war where this trait shows. Even in peace, you move too fast, push too hard. Vexel's mandibles clicked twice in thought. Perhaps this is why humans have disrupted galactic politics so quickly. Other species proceed with caution, weighing every risk. You simply act. Rakoff shrugged. Not like the galaxy waits around for permission. The chamber was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Less fearful, more thoughtful. Vexel's eyes flickered toward his fellow council members. This discussion is far from over, he said. But one thing is clear. He turned back to ROV. We cannot treat you as we do other species. You're something else entirely. Rakoff smirked. You just figuring that out now? The council chamber remained silent, the weight of realization pressing down on every delegate present. Humanity was different, fundamentally, dangerously different. Vexel studied ROV, mandibles twitching in thought. You say you do not let fear dictate your actions, that you push forward regardless of risk. I'm starting to understand why your kind is difficult to control. ROV's expression was unreadable. Control? Was that ever the goal? The crushed delegate exhaled through flared nostrils. Every species that joins the council integrates into the greater order. We provide guidance, structure. Yet humanity does not integrate, it reshapes. His claws tapped against the table. You do not follow the rules. You make your own. ROV sighed. Look, we're not here to tear down your way of doing things. We just don't think like you do. And maybe that's a good thing. The Varric warrior let out another amused chuckle. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is what will bring the downfall of this council. Vexel's gaze remained fixed on ROV. Do you even realize the disruption your presence has caused? ROV met his stare evenly. You mean because we don't hesitate? Because we take risks? No, Vexel said, his voice low. Because you make others question why they don't. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Slowly, some delegates exchanged glances. They had always followed the same patterns, the same rules of caution, diplomacy, and careful advancement. But then humans arrived, charging into battles they should have avoided, consuming food without hesitation, forging alliances with species others had feared, and they thrived. The realization was unsettling. The crushed delegate's voice was quieter now, more thoughtful. For millennia, we have called caution wisdom. We have called patience strength. And yet humans. He trailed off. You defy every assumption. ROV leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. Maybe that's a good thing. Vexel's mandibles clicked. Or maybe it is a threat to everything we have built. The Zari delegate, who had been among the most critical of humanity, shifted in his seat. Then what do we do with them? A long pause. The Varric warrior's voice was calm, steady. We adapt. The response sent a ripple through the chamber. Vexel studied the warrior with all 6 of his compound eyes. Adapt. The Varric nodded. Humans do not fear risk because they have mastered surviving it. They do not hesitate because hesitation has never served them. He exhaled slowly. Perhaps it is time we stop viewing them as reckless and begin to see them as something to learn from. ROV's smirk returned. Took you long enough. Vexel's mandibles twitched in irritation, but he could not deny the truth of the words. Humanity had forced the galaxy to reconsider everything it believed about survival, strength, and progress. They did not fear the unknown, and in doing so, they changed how others saw it as well. The crushed delegate's claws tapped against the table once more, but this time slower, more measured. Vexel straightened. The crush's reptilian gaze flicked toward Rakoff. That humanity remains within the council, not as a disruptive force, but as a catalyst for growth. A murmur spread through the chamber. Some species hesitated, but others nodded. Vexel took a slow breath before turning to ROV. And what do you propose, Ambassador? If we are to accept that your kind does not abide by the same instincts as others, what then is your place among us? ROV's smirk softened, replaced by something more serious. We don't want to rule. We don't want to break the system. We just want to be part of it our way. We'll take risks, push boundaries, and sometimes drive you all crazy. He glanced around the room. But we'll also be the first ones to stand beside you when things go wrong. Because that's who we are. Silence. Then, the Varric warrior stood, his heavy armor clanking as he turned to face the council. I accept humanity among us. One by one, others rose, the crushed delegate, the Zari, even Vexel, though his mandibles twitched with reluctance. Rakoff simply leaned back in his chair, a small, satisfied grin on his face. Deep down, he had always known how this would end. Humanity was here to stay, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Galactic Council chamber remained silent long after the vote had been cast. The monumental decision had been made. Humanity was not an anomaly to be feared, but a force to be understood. Yet, as the chamber emptied, a few figures remained, still contemplating the implications of what had transpired. Ambassador ROV stood at the edge of the Grand Chamber, looking over the intricate symbols etched into the walls. They represented civilizations far older than humanity's, species that had shaped the stars long before humans had even understood fire. Yet today, those ancient species acknowledged that the newcomers, fragile, impulsive, and audacious, had something to offer. "You're thinking too much." Rakoff turned to see the towering form of the Varric warrior, arms crossed over his plated chest. His kind had been among the first to recognize humanity's potential, not as a mistake of evolution, but as an anomaly that forced others to adapt. "I do that sometimes," Rakoff said. "Call it a flaw." The Varric warrior let out a dry laugh. "If it were a flaw, your species would not have made it this far. We fight with strength. You fight with momentum. That's why you survive." Rakoff nodded. "And now we've changed things. For better or worse." A new voice entered the conversation, low and deliberate, a click. Vexel approached, his insectoid frame moving with precise calculation. "You say that as if there is uncertainty in the outcome." Rakoff sighed. "Because there is. The vote went in our favor, but that doesn't mean everyone's happy about it. Some are still afraid of us, and fear can be dangerous." Vexel's mandibles twitched. "Perhaps, but fear also forces progress. For centuries, we have operated under the assumption that caution is the guiding principle of civilization. Humanity has shown that survival is not merely a matter of avoiding risk, but knowing when to take it." Rakoff studied the insectoid diplomat carefully. Of all those in the chamber, Vexel had been the most resistant to humanity's acceptance. To hear him now, speaking of change rather than opposition, was a testament to how much had already shifted. The crushed delegate joined them, his scaled form moving with slow precision. "This will not be an easy path," he warned. "The Council may have accepted your kind, but that does not mean the rest of the galaxy will. Some will resist. Others will see you as an opportunity. You have opened the door to something none of us can predict." ROV exhaled. "We're used to that." The Varric warrior tilted his head. "Then I suspect your people will thrive." Vexel considered the words, then nodded. "Perhaps. Or perhaps we will all. If you like, give one like and subscribe in the channel.